Test. Oh yeah, looks like I'm good. Okay. I'm Phil Wyman, and this is the Wild Theology Podcast, where the world, the humans in it, and God are all wilder than we've been told.
That's your intro.
So, you'll get philosophy and theology and crazy stories that come from 30 years of pastoring,
Boring.
20 years of festival work,
Whatever.
and the mud and blood of wrestling with the living in spaces angels fear to tread.
Trying to sound interesting, are we? Yeah, you think you got something to say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem, dimwit.
Look, I'm a lot smarter than you think.
Yeah, you tightened your shoes this morning.
Whatever. We're Phil Wyman, and this is Wild Theology, where you get to argue with your own ideas.
And lose.
That's the point. This is a short series called the Obscene Hermeneut. Hermeneut is a person who practices hermeneutics, which has been described as the theory and methodology for understanding things. Traditionally, hermeneutics was attached to literature, especially the Bible, but it has been expanded to include the way we see things and understand the world around us. In this short series, I want to challenge how we think about the things we think about. This is the Obscene Hermeneut, Part 1, and I'd like to begin with a story. Back in 2014, a photography exhibit came to the United States. It was called Purity. It was photos of fathers and their daughters in suits and ball gowns who were participants in something called purity balls. There was quite an uproar about his exhibit once it hit the United States. David Magnusson came from Sweden, and much more secular society. He anticipated that these purity balls that were based around the idea of young women remaining sexually pure, virgins until they were married, and making vows about that, their sexuality, with their fathers present at a ball that was much like a senior prom. He anticipated this to be something that was formed out of a religious fear and a fundamentalism that was oppressive. But when he took the photos, he discovered that these were just regular people with a different lifestyle than his own, and they did have some fear, but it was more based in a desire to protect. And as it turned out, it was not usually the father's idea to take their daughters to this ball. It was the daughters who asked their fathers to take them, and they were the ones wanting to make these promises. It was birthed out of their love for God and their desire to live, as they saw it, a pure life. Now, the news perceived this quite differently, and so there were all kinds of responses. The most common word used was creepy. The creepy photos of these fathers and daughters looked like they were getting married to one another. So the uproar that came from the public about the purity ball portraits was significantly different than the photographer's own desire to express something that he found very alien to himself, but the people who were participants in it saw great beauty. And of course there was a bit of a desire to see the public response in how we might respond to this very different culture, a culture very different even here in the United States. It's interesting how one person saw the pictures as a beautiful expression of a desire to remain pure, and another perceived it as obscene. Now here's the point. We are all hermeneuts. Everything we read, every picture we see, every movie we watch, every song we listen to, and every conversation we have involves our interpretation of those moments and in our interaction with him. We interpret the evening news and the politics of our family members through a certain lens. In every interaction we have with the world around us, we're making judgments about the things we hear and see. French philosopher Paul Ricoeur used the terminology the Hermeneutics of Suspicion to describe what has since become a prevailing pattern of the way we interpret the world around us. He described Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche as the heroes of this school of suspicion. Their suspicion, particularly of religion, peeled back the layers of things people had neglected to challenge because of tradition or habit. Now, in Ricoeur's opinion, this suspicion and critique needed to be focused not only outwardly on the object of our attention, but also inwardly upon ourselves. Is it possible, he asked, that we are imposing meaning upon the things we observe that is not inherent to the subject itself? Could we be interpreting the world around us differently than the authors of those words or actions intended? And in a sense, are we putting words into their mouths that they would never say in a million years? These thoughts from Ricoeur are not particularly new. Biblical references call us to judge righteous judgment. In one moment, we are called to believe all things, and the next to test those who say they are prophets. So openness, acceptance, and grace is met with a passionate desire to discover and reveal things that are inauthentic, dishonest, or untrue. So it seems that being suspicious or skeptical is a good thing. Peeling back layers of lies appears to be crucial to living a good life. The problem is that sometimes the lies are not always external. They don't simply reside in someone else or something else. They often live within me, and I am blind to them. And this highlights the importance of applying the hermeneutics of suspicion to myself in at least equal fervor that I would apply it to others. Not only should I have a healthy dose of skepticism, I should also be skeptical about my own skepticism, just in case I've gone too far and created evil where it doesn't exist. Now let's apply these principles to the story of the purity balls. Young teenage women asked their fathers to take them to the purity ball, where they would be making vows to remain sexually chaste until marriage. And they wanted their dads to be there as witnesses who would similarly promise to protect their daughters in a sexually charged world and at a particularly vulnerable season in life. This was a personal lifestyle choice made by the girls involved. Scores of people saw the pictures, and as is often the case, did not read further into the story or see the interviews of the girls talking about the event. Based upon photos of girls in ball gowns standing in photos with their fathers, in poses expressing the love they have for one another, people read sexual content into the pictures and called them creepy. They saw hints of sexuality where it most likely didn't exist. Therefore, we can say that the obscenity most likely did not exist in the people in the photos, but instead, obscenity was assumed to be there by the people who were looking at the photos. We're often blind to our own biases. Some of us have been abused or mistreated by people, and anything that reminds us of that abuse triggers a sense of disgust. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt identifies disgust as a response to things that should be kept sacred. He sees this as a response predominantly found among conservative people, particularly religious conservatives, who feel that their faith or their beliefs have been violated. Interestingly, the sense of disgust flowed in the opposite direction in this example of the purity ball exhibit. One person's sense of holiness was viewed in disgust and was seen as obscenity by another. Strangely, in a culture where freedom of expression is presented as inviolable, the very protectors of that free expression and its corresponding alternative lifestyles viewed another alternative lifestyle in disgust. They saw something pornographic where it didn't exist. The takeaway for us is this. As much as we are required to view our broken world with a touch of skepticism, we need to hold that same touch of skepticism about ourselves and about our opinions of others. We need to practice the hermeneutics of suspicion toward our own hearts as faithfully as we do toward the world around us. Our neglect to do that will cause us to become hermeneuts of obscenity. We may end up calling things obscene when in fact they are not. And when we do that, it begins to resemble the warning of the prophet Isaiah. We become like those who call good evil and evil good. This has been the Wild Theology Podcast, and we're Phil Wyman. Hey, you there?
Dude, you're on your own on this one.
Fine. The guitar picking in the middle was done by me and cheaply recorded on my iPhone.
Duh. Figure that out.
The ambient music was Listening for the Voice of God by my good friend David Gerard. You can find his music on ambientism.bandcamp.com.
Well, at least there was one pro involved in this.
I think that went pretty well. What do you think?
Yeah. Your mom will like it. Maybe.
You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And you can also find me on patreon.com/Phil Wyman. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah. Thanks for putting up with him.